In this video, let's learn about binding to HTTP body, which means that we're going to have a parameter that binds to the HTTP body. And usually that parameter is going to be a complex type. So far in our examples, we have been using primitive types, right? Simple types. And for binding to the body, we usually always bind a complex type to the body. For example, for a map post, okay, for handling put or patch, we want to bind a parameter from the handler to the body. And that's why we're extracting complex type from here. So we get a stream reader, we read a body, and we use a JSON serializer to deserialize the JSON into a .NET object. All of these should be done by ASP.NET Core framework. And that's exactly what model binding here is for. We're going to bind a complex type, right? So let's remove all of this. So let's change all of this. So remove this async. We're going to not use the HTTP context signature. We are going to bind from the body. And if we provide a complex type, automatically or by default, ASP.NET Core would think that you're going to bind this parameter to the body. It's going to look for the information or the data in the HTTP body. So I'm going to say employee, just like that. And then we don't need all of this anymore. Let's delete it. Delete this as well. Let's don't worry about returning status code in this lesson. So let's delete this line. We're going to talk about that later when we learn about returning results. So I'm going to delete this status code as well. Here we can just return this as a message. And if there's anything wrong with the information in the parameter here, we can also return and say employee is not provided or is not valid, something like this. Let's give it a try. All right, let's go to Postman because we're gonna trigger the post endpoint. And again, we're gonna add Tom Anderson, a software developer. Click on Send button. And we're seeing this employee added successfully. What if I change this to -6, for example? Click on Send. We get this employee is not provided or is not valid, although the status code is incorrect. We don't worry about the status code later. But you can see at least we are getting the model binding here correctly into the endpoint handler here. I'm going to format this slightly better. All right. So this is binding to the body. Binding to the HTTP body in minimal API actually has some limitations. The first one is that it's going to assume that in the HTTP body here is always going to be JSON. But as you can see, you can use so many different formats in the body. However, for minimal API, the information in the HTTP body has to be JSON. Cannot be anything else, and you cannot configure it to use any other serializers. This is different from MVC or Razor Pages. With MVC or Razor Pages, you can actually specify to use a XML serializer, for example. So in those technologies, different formats are supported. In minimal API, only JSON is supported and you cannot replace that, which is understandable because most of the APIs deal with JSON. That's the first limitation. The second limitation is that in the JSON, you cannot have multiple types of the data. For example, you have an employee and then you want to add something else. Let's say you have another type that has ID and company name, right? So if this is a company information and also another one that is a employee information. So this is not valid. Of course, in this case, it's not valid because it's not even a valid JSON. But anyways, I'm just trying to point out that you can only have one single complex type in the JSON in order to bind to it, right? So that's another limitation. And of course, you will have to specify a valid JSON as I mentioned. So something like this. Let's say that we're removing a comma here and then click on send button. What do we have? We're seeing that we have a bad request. Fail to read parameters from request body as JSON. Okay? And let's say you're providing something else, ABC. Right? This is not a valid JSON. And if you click on send button, now you also have a bad HTTP request. Let's say that you have XML. Let's say employee ID equals 3 or 4. Name equals Anderson. So this is a valid XML, but if we send this, right, we also get bad request, 400 bad request. Right, let me revert back. So you have to have correct valid JSON in order to make this work. And also because JSON should be actually contained in the body, so attempting to use anything other than post, put, or patch. Right? For example, if you try to use get with a body, you can actually try that. You go over here and go to body, you put this one over here. This is not recommended. Don't try to do this. It's going to confuse the server. Right? Don't try to do this, or try to do head, or try to do body. Should be only contained in either a post request or a put request or a patch request. Don't try to use any other things, of course, including delete. Don't try to put a body in there. It's going to confuse the server. Okay, that's what I want to show you. The main thing is that if you put a complex type in the endpoint handler as a parameter, it's going to look for the information from the body by default. And of course, it's possible to bind this to the headers or the query string or the root values. We're going to talk about that later. But by default, it's going to go to the body to look for information, right? So if you don't provide anything in the HTTP body here and then click on send, still couldn't find the employee information, and then it's going to give you 400 bad requests. All right, that's everything I want to show you in this video, and I will see you in the next one.